Hi everyone, it's Dr. Weebreck here for the Intro to Sociology class. It's March 23rd, 2020. Hope everybody's doing well. I know a lot of you were able to get online today to do the Google chat, so that was really great. It was really good to see and hear all of you guys face to face. I think it's a great way for us to continue to connect sort of during these unprecedented times. So during our normally scheduled class, if you're able to and if you have access, I'm going to encourage you guys to check in, even if it's just for a brief amount of time, but that way we can all just check in, make sure everybody's good. We can review any questions you guys might have. You guys can interact with some of your classmates a little bit. It gives us a different opportunity to all sort of reconnect and communicate a little bit differently than what I think we have been in the past week or so. All right, so I'm jumping into chapter 4, but before I do that, I got most of your bonuses. Otherwise, I just need to get your mass media papers. Don't worry about the presentation just yet. We can talk about that on Thursday, now that we sort of fine-tuned how to do the Google Meet. But I wanted to give everybody an opportunity to get acclimated with that. We can play that by ear. We'll sort of do a discussion as to how everybody wants to proceed with the presentation piece of it. Do we just forego that? Can we do something via Google Meet so that we can sort of explore some options? Okay, so chapter 4. Let's move forward here. We are starting to talk about social structures and social interactions. Last session, we discussed a little bit more in detail the difference between macro sociology and micro sociology. We fixated a little bit on macro sociology. We talked about how these approaches are very common with conflict theorists and functionalists, and why they sort of examine the various aspects of social structure and how that can impact a society's framework. We looked at culture, we looked at social class, social status and roles a little bit more intense. We ended our class talking about groups. Our final discussion that I want to talk about macro sociology would be focused on social institutions. I think this is an important aspect for us to sort of look at. Social institutions are the organized or usual or standard way in which a society meets its basic needs. So think about that. In industrial and post-industrial societies, social institutions encompass like the family, religion, law, politics, religion, economics, education, science, medicine, the military, and even the mass media at that time. So functionalists and conflict theorists really focus on these particular social institutions. Now, they do not all agree as far as the purposes and effects of those social institutions, but they do overall state, yes, these social institutions exist, and they meet universal group needs overall. So functionalists believe that overall. Now, conflict theorists on the flip side say, social institutions are primary means by which the elite, right, maintains its privileged position. So who has control over those particular social institutions is the conflict theory's argument. We know that social structures are not static. They are constantly evolving. We see this in today's day and age. What are those social institutions that are important to us? Would we place medicine higher in today's current state of the world versus maybe the military or maybe education or economics? Where do those institutions fall and lie when we look at that? And do they respond in changes within our culture and technology, economic conditions, group relationships, and even societal needs and priorities? So we know that right now, with everything that's going on in our state of the world, would you, as a group or as a class or an individual, state that there are certain social institutions that are held in higher regards than other ones? So I think it's important for us to look at how those structural changes can sometimes fundamentally and permanently alter the way a society organizes itself, right? We talked about Emil Durkheim before, the guy that did all of his studies on suicide rates. He demonstrated this sort of with the concepts of what we had talked about in the previous chapter, in chapter 2, I think, when we were talking about cultures, right? He stated, listen, there's this concepts of mechanical and organic solidarity that exist. Ferdinand Tonez utilized it in the common words that we had talked about, Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft, which I'm probably destroying this pronunciation of those words. But those two things, because of the fact that we know that we're looking at different social structures and how people interact as a groups and as a whole. So think about that from a macro perspective, right? Are we looking at those social structures? What's happening around us right now? And is that impacting these social institutions that we're seeing? And we can obviously talk about the micro relationships that we see and how social distancing is changing the way that we're interacting with one another. Is that going to have some larger effect in the world and how we all interact moving forward after this? So these are all really good questions and things that I think are really important for us to talk about. Let's break down social institutions a little bit more. We know social institutions are society's ways of meeting its basic needs, right? So the family, religion, law, politics, economics, education, science, medicine, and the military are all social institutions, okay? So in industrialized societies, we know those social institutions tend to be more formal, right? And in non-literate societies, we know that they're more informal, right? So each institution has its own groups, statuses, values, and norms as a result of that. Think about that. These social institutions are sociologically significant because they set limits and provide guidelines for our behaviors, right? Think about it. The family, right? What is the purpose of the family? To reproduce, right? And to guide us in certain behaviors and norms and behaviors that we have, right? So the family within itself, the social institution of a family, has changed drastically from our grandparents' generations to our generation. Think how many children that used to be socially acceptable to have. I mean, they would have, multiple children to help take care of the household needs, maybe the family farm, right? Nowadays, what's acceptable to you? Is it 1? Is it 2? Is 3 too much? It changes as we begin to see each society evolve and what those values and norms are within each culture. So I think it's important for us to look at that. Let's use another example, right? We talked about maybe the concept of religion and how this social institution, whether you have a religious background or not, we know that it can significantly impact our overall society and overall culture with how we look and view and behave towards things. Somebody's religion can change the way that they interact with other people, the way they dress, the way that their belief systems, when they get married, when they have children, all those things are sort of coupled within that. So it's really important for us to look at that. One in which we had begun talking about in chapter 3 was the mass media. We know that this social institution is so vast in what it holds in weight with how we interact with one another and the ways that we behave. Think about it. The mass media is emerging as more and more of a predominant thing that controls and behaves and guides our behaviors. It influences our attitudes towards social issues, other people, or even our own self-concept, right? So think about all the stuff that you're absorbing, especially right now, right? Are you guys getting influxed with things from Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat? Are you seeing tons of things on the news? Does that vary upon what news channel you're watching? Those are so important. Or the areas in which you live in. Does that affect what kind of mass media content you're receiving? Who controls it? Who's controlling what it is that you're absorbing within that? Functionalists would say that mass media represents varied interests of many different groups. So, of a nation, would you guys agree with that? While conflict theorists, on the other hand, see that there's interests of the political elite who has certain controls over things. Are they sort of dictating what's being shown on TV or what's not being shown on TV? And why is that? Are their interests more being represented than others? Those are all really important. So functionalists and conflict theorists do differ in how they see social institutions. I think that's really important for us to understand. Functionalists view social institutions sort of as established of a meeting group, right? There's some type of need that's being met there. And we know functionalists always see a need in some concept, right? So think about it. In those social institutions, they believe that things can be replacing members, right? Maybe you're socializing new members and you're producing and distributing goods and services, maybe preserving an order of something, or maybe you're providing a sense of purpose. Think about that. In the field of, in the example of a social institution of medicine, right? If there is a doctor that decides, I'm retiring, I'm no longer going to be a doctor anymore, does that mean all of a sudden that client or patient all of a sudden says, okay, I'm done with healthcare, I'm done, my doctor left, right? No, not necessarily. What ends up happening is then there's somebody else. Maybe they have a new doctor that's shifted into that position to take over that practice. Or maybe you're going to go find and search for a new doctor within your community, right? We're replacing members. We're constantly filling those voids in which we do. Maybe they're just providing a service. And so they're meeting a need. When they can no longer meet that need, then you have to look elsewhere for somebody else. So it provides that sense of purpose. It provides those levels, which I think are highly important for us to sort of guide and look at. On the flip side, conflict theorists, right, look at those social institutions as those primary means by which the elite try to stay in those privileged positions. Think about politics, really good example of a social institution. We know that there are certain individuals in which, they're trying to hold certain elite beliefs from their Democratic or Republican Party, right, in certain fields and perspectives of individuals. So I think it's important for us to look and see, what are those parties trying to say? Who are they pushing as a candidate? What are they representing as a whole for our nation? And why is that important when we're looking at the bigger scheme of things, right? So changes in social structure occur as there are cultural changes, right? Because of evolving values, we know that, it's not typical for people to have 8 kids anymore, right? That's not typical. In most family sizes, we have a much more moderate within our society. Is there a belief on medicine and the use of certain medicines? We talk about vaccinations sometimes, and how there's just this rift between those that believe that vaccinations should occur and those that don't. Why is that? What are those emerging beliefs and values sets that are sort of there, and what's guiding those behaviors and belief systems within both sides? Even when we begin to see new technologies, that can change the way in which certain ways these institutions sort of exist. We see this in today with the education, right? Traditionally, it's face-to-face. Our education should be face-to-face. You're coming to school, you're meeting and interacting people, you're receiving that one-on-one interaction with your teacher. But because of the current state of where we are with things, we had to adapt. In order for students to continue to learn, we're moving to an online format and something virtual where students are going to have to, stay motivated in order to maintain that schoolwork, to get information from other resources and stuff. So we begin to see that. And as innovative ideas like group chats, group calls, Skype, Zoom, all these things begin to change, it creates this concept of globalization, right? Where we know people from all over the world are interacting with things. We're getting news reports from all these other cultures and countries giving us updates on what's happening there, and vice versa. So many sociologists have tried to find an answer to the question of what holds societies together. We know that Emile Durkheim had talked about that social cohesion, and he had indicated that the degree to which members of a society feel united and connected and share those values and bonds can greatly affect that mechanical solidarity or that organic solidarity. Remember, if you would, mechanical solidarity is that collective consciousness that people experience as a result of performing the same or similar tasks, right? While on the flip side, organic solidarity refers to that collective cohesiveness, right? On that interdependence brought about by increasingly specialized division of labor. That's sort of how people divide certain tasks, right? So think about that. In a mechanical solidarity, right? We know that farmers in our community sort of have the same sort of mindset when it comes to agriculture and producing foods and that type of stuff. Yes, they're going to have some slight differences and maybe in how they go about it, but they're going to overall maybe have the same values and belief systems when it comes to, do they believe agriculture is good for the community? How is that moving certain things within our culture and our society? On the flip side, when we look at that organic solidarity, we're talking about that there are different compartmentalized pieces of things, right? If you're building a chair at a factory, you're not necessarily going to build that whole chair from start to finish. Just sort of like at Abilene Boot. If you work at that company, right, you're not building that whole boot within itself. You're doing a very specialized task within that. Maybe you're just putting on that heel of that boot and then you move the boot on, right? And then the next person puts on a different piece of the shoe. And then they keep moving down until that boot is finished, right? The same thing sort of happens within our culture and our society, right? We have these different production pieces, very specialized parts of our labor. Not everybody's going to hold all these pieces of things. Maybe it's just a very specialized, compartmentalized piece that sort of divide up certain tasks. So Ferdinand Tonez talked about that intimate community, which is that Gemeinschaft, right? That everybody's sort of involved, everybody sort of helps each other as a community out, very much intertwined and interrelated. In our particular society, we're beginning to see more of a Gesellschaft. And I'm probably destroying the pronunciation of these words, right? But it's that impersonal association, right? So when you go to Starbucks and you're sitting there drinking your coffee or you're working on your homework or studying, do you go and talk to everybody in Starbucks? I doubt you do. Maybe you do, right? But for the most part, those individuals are going to have, you're going to be in that same space and setting, but you might not interact with them. When you're in the library, especially in college, you might just go there to study and then you move on to the next space, right? You might not interact with all those people in that particular area. And that's what Tonez is talking about, is the fact that we as a society tend to be very compartmentalized in that sense. Very impersonal associations. Oh, I went to the coffee shop. I saw that person. It's not necessarily like you know that person very well, but you're having those impersonal connections. And so that's important for us to look at that. Maybe it's that individual accomplishment or maybe that self-interest within that. Very important for us to look at. All right, these concepts are, of course, still relevant today. We know this. It's very contemporary in the things that we're dealing with, even within such discussions as the rise of Islamic fundamentalism. We know that can all be incorporated within that. Okay. All right, I'm going to end here. That is the end of us talking about macro sociology. We're going to jump into Thursday's class. I'll give you guys the notes there again, where we're talking about micro sociology and how those social interactions in our everyday life are sort of important. like I said, a lot of this information builds upon each other from the things that we had talked about in chapter 1 and chapter 2 and chapter 3. They're very common sense concepts. I'll continue to give you guys the notes, but if you need further explanation, please feel free to talk to me about that during our Google meeting on Thursday. We should hopefully be able to finish out chapter 4 this week. So hopefully that'll be helpful for you guys, okay? All right, thanks guys. Please be safe. Continue to take care of one another. Be kind to one another. When we miss all of you guys, especially those that were not able to be on Google Meet, hopefully I'll get to see you guys Thursday if you guys get a chance. Make sure you download this app so that we can connect. Continue to work on your mass media paper for me. Reach out to me with any questions. Please take care of yourself. Be safe. All right, I'll talk to you guys soon. All right, bye-bye.